Have a seat on your porcelain throne. It's time to talk some shit on the Powell movement.
Welcome to the Powell movement. I'm your host, Mike Powell, and this week I have a long intro for you documenting more of the shit show that my life has been this year. As you know, if you've been listening lately, I've been really excited to see the final Dead shows in Boulder. It was something I've been looking forward to as almost a celebration of putting a lot of shit behind me. As most of you know, my wife got sick in October. She went into a life-saving emergency surgery, and that all happened the day that the Dead tickets went on sale. I was supposed to buy my seats, and my buddy was going to buy his. But looking back into my text history, this is how it all went down. Dude, can you buy my tickets for the 1st and the 3rd? I'm not going to be able to be at a computer tomorrow. I didn't mention it the other day, but Ange has been having some medical problems lately, and Monday they found a tumor which they think is cancer. It's totally blocking her colon, and it's causing her so much pain. After 2 nights in the ER, they have her in emergency surgery right now. I have a strong feeling that I'm not going to be able to get my tickets. I'll pay you back whenever you send me your PayPal. Thanks, man. So this was the heaviest time in my life. So many tears, so much fear, so much uncertainty, but Ange was a trooper, and she was making it through all these awful treatments after her diagnosis. And I was thinking that if she gets better, I'm going to party my face off in Colorado with my good friend Steve and his crew. And sure as shit, Ange made it. It was such a relief, and it also meant that I was going to be able to celebrate like I had planned to. But you know how life can go sometimes. On Tuesday night, I get a call from my dad that my Uncle Bobby had died. He had had a lot of health problems over the past 10 years, but it seemed like he was doing better lately. But on that Tuesday, he went and laid out by his pool, he put some headphones on, and he passed away with a smile on his face. I guess it was a really peaceful way to go, but still so sad. Now, my Uncle Bobby, he was a true character. He was an endodontist who lived more than all of us. I mean, he did just about everything. He loved to party. He was a magician, a travel agent, a fisherman, an anesthesiologist, a pharmacy tech, but I told you he was also an endodontist, so he crushed it in life, had a place in Aspen, he loved to ski, he loved everybody to have just as good a time around him that he was having, and he loved to cross the line just like I do at times. He was such a fun guy. You know, he was that uncle that bought me throwing stars and a machete when I was in 4th grade. He's the guy that taught me how to take proper tequila shots when I was 14 or 15. He was the man. He was so much fun. So anyways, Bobby is gone, and I loved him so much, and really, when I look back at my relationship with him, I really do wish I talked with him a lot more, but that's something I'm going to have to deal with, and it is what it is. At this point, I call my buddy Steve, and I let him know that I'm not going to be able to go to the Dead shows. I'm going to fly out on Thursday for a funeral on Friday, and to tell you the truth, I was so upset about my uncle being gone, but I was also really, really upset about missing these shows, and I felt really selfish about being bummed about that, like, I shouldn't feel bad about missing a concert when my uncle's dead, but that's how I felt, and I don't know what was going on in my head. But anyway, I was not going to miss this funeral. I would regret it every day for the rest of my life. But the funeral was going to be on Friday, and this means I was going to be able to do both things. Everyone told me at the funeral Bobby would have wanted me to go to the shows. So I made it to Florida. I went to the funeral on the first day. I sat Shiva, which is like Jewish for sitting around talking about the person who passed away and celebrating them. I believe that's what it means. I'm not 100% sure. I did that. It was so great to see my cousins, my dad, my sister. I hung out with everyone after the funeral. And then I flew out Saturday morning to Boulder for the Dead shows. I land in Denver. I meet Steve. We shuttle to Boulder. And then we proceed to walk about 15 miles around town before losing our minds night one. The show was incredible. I was still bummed about my uncle, and then 20 minutes into the concert, it started to rain a little bit, and the band plays the song Me and My Uncle. That's when everything changed for me. It was such a weird and surreal moment. I felt like my uncle was there, and then a minute later, this huge double rainbow came out, and I got this incredible picture of me in front of it. It was insane. I don't know what I believe happens after death, because I'm really confused about that, but holy shit, did this moment have an impact on me. I really think Bobby was there. On day 2, we met up with the rest of the crew, about 10 of us. Most of the dudes I didn't know, but it's one of those groups where everybody is awesome in their own way and everybody brings something different to the table. And when everybody collectively comes together, it's so much fun. I'm sure everybody's had a group like this, and that's what we have going to these shows. On night 2, I wasn't really planning on going in, because let's be honest, I don't need to see that many Dead shows. But I ended up with a ticket for night 2, and I was like, okay, I'll head in. I was on the floor and I got pretty close to the stage, but the second night just wasn't the same vibe for me. My plan was never to go night 2. And my takeaway from going to these shows after everything that went on during this weekend or these 5 days or whatever is stick to the plan. If you go into an event with a plan, you don't need to change it unless something makes you change it. But if you can, stick with the plan and everything will be better. That was my takeaway with the whole thing. So I ended up going in for night 2. I wish I would have skipped night 2 because it really just didn't really gel with me. I should have stuck to the plan. After learning that lesson, it was time to prep for the final show. And for this show, I knew I had to get in some better headspace. And whatever I had for dinner worked because I was on fire. Night 3 might have been the best concert of my life. Attitude is everything, and going in there with the right attitude, like anything in life, made it a game changer. Even with an hour weather delay, nothing could spoil the fun that night. And the cherry on top was this insane drone show and a guest appearance from Dave Matthews. So that was the show, and while I almost feel guilty for going, I'm so happy I did go. I love you so much, Bobby. I hope you were there with me. I felt like you were there with me. And while losing my uncle was really bad news, I have another punch to the stomach to bring up. For this one, I have to take you back to October, when Ange was first diagnosed. I had come home from the hospital the day that Ange had our huge surgery, and I had to walk the dog. While I'm walking my dog, I see a friend, a guy I worked with at K2. His name's Ken Sheely. And Ken tried talking to me, but I couldn't talk to Ken. I burst into tears, and I was like, sorry, dude. And I walked away. I couldn't talk to him. I texted him later on, and I let him know that I was sorry for being a jerk, but I just had so much shit going on, and I think he knew it was going on, and he understood. Fast forward to earlier this month, and I get word that Ken has cancer. And here's my message to Ken on June 13th. Holy shit, Ken. I'm sorry you're going through cancer. I know it's scary, and I know it sucks. The treatment, while it's no fun, it worked for my wife, and I'm hoping you have the same results. I don't know what I can do, but if you need help with a lawn getting mowed or a ride or whatever, I'm here and don't hesitate to ask. I'm thinking about you and praying for you, man. Ken came back with, thanks so much, Powell. Yeah, this is really rough, as you know. We'll reach out if I think of anything. Well, that was my letter to Ken on June 13th, and only 2 weeks later, Ken passed from cancer. He leaves behind a wife and a kid, and it's so sad. Ken was a great guy, a dude who was rumored to be in Built to Spill before they went big time. He was an awesome guy, and he loved building skis. It's another huge loss, and it totally sucks. So while this isn't the most positive intro I've had, it gets a lot more positive right now because my guest this week is Joe Johnson, and Joe is getting married days after this podcast comes out. So congratulations, Joe. This is something super happy, something great for you. I'm stoked, and Joe is one of those dudes whose work has hit every corner of ski industry marketing. From agencies to resorts to brands, Joe has done it all, and he's got an incredible story. He's definitely a marketing guru with some highs and lows that we talk about in the podcast. I won't spoil any of it. Before we get into it, I want to ask you to do a few things for me. The first is to review me wherever you listen. That and telling your friends about the show really does help it grow. I also want you to support the incredible brands that make this show happen. They are Stanley, Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, Elon Skis, Rollerblade, and Best Day Brewing. Now, it's time to talk with Joe Johnson. You are a sneaker guy, and while you haven't been posting as much lately, there was a time when you posted a shit ton of cool shoe pics. How many pairs of shoes do you own?
Right now, I'm probably sitting at close to 40 pairs of shoes. The sneaker obsession goes back quite a few years. Honestly, like before Salomon, I guess I just never had the money to kind of get into the game as much as I'd like. I kind of kept the collection pretty tight, but I'd say I'm right around 40 pairs right now.
How much is the most you've spent on a pair of footwear?
Close to $200, which is not much when you compare myself to most sneakerheads. But I think the biggest difference is like, not only do I appreciate sneakers, but I freaking wear them. I don't understand the people that just keep them in boxes. It's like, let those things breathe, get them out and show them off a little bit. That's where I come from.
I hear that, and I would think, working at Salomon, you get a bunch of free pairs of footwear each year. But do you ever get the opportunity to design a pair yourself, like get totally custom shit for yourself?
No, not yet. I haven't got that opportunity yet. The sports style department is run out of Annecy, France. We have a couple people that work on the sports style side of the business here in Ogden. I'm super close with them, Brian Diaz and George Egan, who are awesome. I did ask if I could get a pair designed for my wedding, which is coming up in July, and I haven't heard back. So I don't think I'm going to be getting the sweet pair of kicks for the wedding.
Man, you're getting married. All you're asking for is a pair of footwear. It costs nothing to them. They can just go to the sample room, use extra fabric and make you one. But they're not going to do it for you, and you're going to have to go to a wedding with footwear that you buy instead of the one-of-a-kind custom ones that you've been dreaming about your whole life. But knowing that you're getting married, I hear that your fiance is big into footwear as well. Who has more?
Yeah, I definitely have more. It's kind of a point of contention. I guess it's like more playful than it is contention, but like I probably have 3 times as much as she does. I've gotten her more into the sneaker game and she's definitely loving it. But as far as whose side of the closet has more shoes, it's definitely mine.
All right, so traditional role reversal there with the quantity of footwear. That's enough about shoes. You grew up in Tonasket, Washington. I probably pronounced it wrong. And normally I'd have a bunch of things to say about the place where you grew up, but there's really nothing. What do I need to know about where you grew up?
Yeah, that's not surprising that there's nothing. It's a small cow town in the middle of nowhere, Washington State, right in the middle of the state and right at the top, about 15 minutes from the Canadian border. You know, it's ranches and orchards and a lot of small towns with a lot of country kids running around. It's high desert. It sits right in the foothills of the Cascade Mountains and in a river valley called the Okanagan Valley. Phenomenal place to grow up. You know everybody. Everybody knows you. If you do something wrong, your parents know about it before you get home.
Right.
I graduated with 76 kids, so super small.
Yeah.
And like I said, it's a phenomenal place to grow up and cool place to go back and visit every now and then.
And it sounds like your childhood was all about basketball. Like there was Nordic skiing, there was a little bit of alpine skiing, but snow didn't define you by any means. It was all about hoops. Would that be accurate?
I would say that is accurate. Yeah, I mean, snow, we had like a local ski hill called Sitzmark, but it was never like a huge part of my life. My parents started me off on Nordic skis. They still both Nordic ski. They don't downhill ski. But basketball was where my passion was. I have an older brother that's 2 years older than me, and that's what we did together. And it carried me through elementary school, middle school, high school, towards college. Him and I coached summer camps together. So it was definitely a common thread for us growing up and something that I still love to this day. Still a huge fan of the game.
So that's what defines your childhood. When it's time for college, you pick Whitworth University. This is a really small, very expensive Christian university. And my questions about that are, did you play basketball? Was your faith part of the reason you went there? Was it close to home? Why Whitworth?
Yeah, I mean, where I grew up, it's an economically depressed area. There's not a lot of quote unquote economy there. My dad worked for the post office. My mom was a school teacher. And a lot of kids end up staying in Tonasket. Not a lot of people leave. Not a lot of people go to college. And when I was getting close to my junior year in high school, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation started what they call the Achiever Scholarship. It's called the Last Dollar Scholarship, and they offered it to 16 low-income high schools in the state of Washington. Tonasket, God bless their soul, like they jumped through all the hoops to get that scholarship for our school. And you had to apply. It was a really strenuous application process. Not only did you have to meet like certain income requirements, but then you had to go through interviews and group exercises and all this kind of stuff. And in the end, after like a summer kind of like scholarship competition where all the kids from the 16 high schools came together, you found out if you got this scholarship. That scholarship is the only reason that I was able to go to a school like Whitworth. Like you said, it's not cheap. I was looking at other schools. I was looking at Western Washington, which would have been great too, looking at state schools, all that kind of stuff. And when I found out I got the scholarship, it allowed me to look other places. Whitworth is a fantastic school. It was a great 4 years there. And so, yeah, that's how I ended up there. And like, I had grand plans of walking on for the basketball team. And that was totally my intention until I got to college and realized that I actually just wanted to do college and enjoy that college experience.
And one thing you did in college was that you had a radio show. So you've done this before. What was your radio show about, and what was your best interview?
Oh, man, you did some research there, pal. So when I went to college, I was going to be a journalism major. So I was kind of taking all the prereqs and some of the other classes to kind of get into that space. And I had dreams of like, I wanted to be on Sports Center. Like I wanted to be Stuart Scott.
Okay.
And kind of like be the guy on the mic. That was kind of what I wanted to do. But the radio show was called Another Round with Joe and Jared. And Jared Carter was one of my best friends in college. And Whitworth had this nice little radio studio, kind of DJ hut in the student center. And we would go in there once a week and we would play country music and we would talk about sports. And so I've come a long way because like I don't really listen to country music as I used to, but still love to talk about sports. And I think we had a couple Whitworth athletes come in and hobnob with us. But usually it was just an opportunity for us to goof off and have a little fun at the same time.
And while you were in school, you did a few internships. And I think that's how you got your first gig out of college with Visit Spokane. But that's just my guess. How do you land your first job?
Yeah, I had 2 internships in college. One of them was with the pretty well-known PR kind of like brand agency in Spokane called Desitel Heggie. And I got a lot of like really good corporate PR experience working for them. And then the other internship was with Spokane Regional Sports Commission, which is essentially every large or medium-sized city has one, and it's their job to bring sporting events to the city. So if you think about the city of Spokane, it was their job to bring in the NCAA tournament and even stuff like the national pickleball tournament or something like that. That was their job. And so that's how I kind of made the connection with like the city of Spokane. And then there's a job that opened up doing tourism, marketing, and PR with Visit Spokane. And that's kind of how I landed there.
And with your job, it sounds like you brought in media people and showed them what the best of Spokane had to offer. And from what I know about Spokane, there's like the big 3-on-3 basketball tournament, the Sports Creel, Gonzaga basketball, there's a big urban waterfall. What else did you have to showcase back then? Like, how did you sell Spokane?
I mean, you pretty much covered it. No, just kidding. Those are some of the highlights of Spokane for sure. I think the cool thing about being with Visit Spokane when I was there is that the city of Spokane was going through some pretty aggressive kind of like rebranding and repositioning of itself as a city within kind of the inland Northwest and in the greater state of Washington. Like the city mantra at the time, it was near nature, near perfect, Spokane. It was really great, actually, and people kind of dug it. But I think the majority of what we tried to do is position Spokane as this other option in Washington outside of Seattle, somewhere that like got you closer within nature. You have the Spokane River that flowed right through downtown, all sorts of hiking trails, paddleboarding, all that stuff on the river. There's mountain biking. You got 5 ski areas in the inland Northwest. And at the time, the brewery and the hard liquor scene was popping off in Spokane, and breweries were starting to pop up. Dry fly distilling was popping up. There's a lot of cool stuff going on. So it was a good time to be there.
And then while basketball was the big passion growing up, is this around the time where that passion shifts towards skiing? Like, are there parts of that job that turn skiing into a major passion for you?
Yeah, I mean, this is that time. And to be clear, I was probably still playing ball like 2 or 3 days a week, pretty religiously, like really competitive kind of rec league stuff, and still playing in, like you mentioned it, in Hoop Fest, the 3-on-3 tournament, which is still to this day one of the coolest events that I think is going on. It's so huge, so much fun. But that is the time, because we would do press and tour events. You know, we had people in from the New York Times, from the Washington Post, from Outside Magazine, like Seattle, California, like all these places we would bring them in. And the goal was to show them this easy access to nature that Spokane offered. So we spent time skiing, we spent time biking, we spent time on the river. It was really cool to be able to show people that.
Is it also true that Father's Day was born in Spokane?
That's my understanding, yeah. And it's also the birthplace of Bing Crosby.
Huh.
That's another little fun fact that I remember.
Okay. And you were with Visit Spokane for a couple of years, and this is around the time of the 2009 recession. Most people were really happy to keep their jobs around then. But for you, what was the reasoning behind quitting your job at such a weird time in the world? Were you young and dumb, or was this calculated and part of a bigger plan?
I mean, I'd probably lean more towards young and dumb, if we're being honest. It was kind of like this interesting time in my life, I guess you could say, and I was trying to figure things out. I remember doing one press event where we were at Schweitzer, and I was sitting on the chair with a journalist. You know, we were going up. If you've ever been to Schweitzer, it's gorgeous. You got Lake Pend Oreille down below you. A lot of times you get like the sun coming up, and there's, you know, a little bit of inversion. You can see clouds, lake, fresh snow. It was awesome. And I was riding up the chair with this journalist and the lady who was doing PR at Schweitzer at the time. And I remember looking at her and being like, "So this is what you do?" And she's like, "Yeah." And I was like, "Done." And I ended up quitting my job. Me and my buddy Tate went and backpacked through Europe for a long time. And before I left, I was like, I'm just going to email some ski areas and see if there's any opportunities for jobs. And so I emailed 2 areas in Colorado and 2 areas in Utah. And I heard back from 3 out of the 4 while I was in Europe and didn't necessarily really respond. And so when I got back, you know, I had these emails and I started hitting up these ski areas, and it kind of came down to, I got a job offer from Solitude. I got a job offer from, I believe it was Winter Park. And then I got an internship offer from Snowbird at the time and ended up deciding to move to Utah for the job at Solitude.
So this is a time when you're just back from Europe, you have pennies to your name, you moved to Solitude pretty much broke, and while you had a real job lined up, you're still a ski bum. Can you describe how poor you were?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to try to put words to how broke I was. You know, it was one of those things where from a financial dollars and cents perspective, I was making just enough to get by. I was living in a classic ski bum house with 3 other guys. They were all ski instructors and or snowboard instructors. And I'm pretty sure that they made more than I did. And, you know, I think one way that best sums it up is that I got to be friends with Casey, who was the manager of the cafe at Solitude. And I had to walk by this cafe on my way to the office every day. And I would go in when they were done serving breakfast and I would snag 2 breakfast burritos. He would let me snag, I guess is the best way to say it, 2 breakfast burritos. So I would get breakfast and then I would save the other one for like lunch/dinner just to save some dollars and pinch some pennies, which looking back at it now, it's pretty crazy to think about. And then, you know, I moved to Utah with a Kia Spectra, which is not exactly what you would call a mountain-worthy vehicle.
Not 4-wheel drive, I don't think.
Definitely not 4-wheel drive. And so for the most part, I would end up parking it at the bottom of Big Cottonwood Canyon and hitchhiking to work, which looking back now is kind of crazy, but it was also kind of awesome. And I like gained a new appreciation for hitchhiking, got to meet a lot of cool people. And actually, I got a ride from a guy who applied for the job that I had, which made for a super awkward ride. But it was a cool experience overall.
That is crazy that you have this real job, but you're hitchhiking to go to work because you can't really afford to get a new car to go to work. And this is when social media is starting to become important, but brands aren't willing to pay anyone to do the work, it seems like. So do you almost become a digital hired gun to handle all social and web stuff because they just don't get it?
I think you kind of nailed it on the head. Like when I was at Visit Spokane, we started, myself and a coworker essentially started all of the social channels that organization still has to this day. And I basically did a similar thing when I got to Solitude. You know, Nick Como was the head of marketing there. And I was coming down for what I thought was a year-round position, like a full-time year-round position. Quickly found out that it was a seasonal role, which was kind of a bummer. But it was classic skier industry, low paying. This is your lifestyle, though. Like, here's some gear. You're going to crush it. But yeah, we kicked off social accounts. We started a blog at Solitude, which I don't think many other resorts in Utah had at the time. We had people from GoPro, because GoPro was just taking off at that time. We had Neil Amonson from the GoPro Bomb Squad, who was like essentially an ambassador for us and was creating content and testing like prototype holds and mounts for GoPro and like testing cameras and stuff. And so it was a really cool time to basically do whatever we want and whatever we thought would work for a resort like Solitude.
And when you're the marketing guy at a resort like that, in that first year there, you're going out with some dudes who have spent, dudes, girls, everyone who've spent their whole lives skiing 100-day seasons. And is there a whole lot of catch up for you that first year, just figuring out how to ski like everybody else?
Oh man, I was floundering. I think back on it now, and like one of the first days I was riding up the lift with my boss, Nick, who's still a really good friend of mine. We were riding up the lift and I remember like I was so busy talking and I feel like trying to impress him that I didn't keep my tips up when we were getting off the lift. I dug a tip right into the off ramp, and luckily I didn't like tear anything because I definitely didn't have health insurance at that point, but popped off a ski, looked like a fool. They had to stop the lift, whatever. But it was kind of one of those things where I threw myself into this situation knowing that I wanted to be a part of it. And that forced me to play catch up. And I learned through trial, and I learned by like doing it with the best. So to your point, like skiing with people who are a lot better than me and just trying to keep up.
So that's on the ski side. But then on the marketing side, you get into this ski industry, which is totally different than I would think Visit Spokane or just about anywhere, because there's not a lot of money. They want you to figure out a lot of things yourself and create a lot of things with no budget. And what do you take away from that first year? I mean, do you learn a ton of different stuff of ski industry marketing that doesn't apply anywhere else but the ski industry?
Yeah, I think the one thing that I took away from it was, to your point, how unique the ski industry is. And it obviously is this small little subset of the greater outdoor industry, and things are a little bit different. But I think overall, what I took away from it, not only through my time specifically at Solitude, but through networking with organizations like Ski Utah, talking with people from other resorts, is the creativity that people have, not only like in their marketing efforts, but with budgets and like how you make stuff happen. People, I feel like in the ski industry, have to be creative to make things work, especially back then. And I think that's the biggest thing that I still use to this day. You know, like when you look at budgets, when you look at what you can do, you know, thinking back to what actually makes consumers want to purchase a product, like a ski ticket, for example, being creative in how to communicate with them, and then also being creative with budget, making sure you're putting the money where it needs to be.
So at the end of that first season with Solitude, they let you know that they want you back, but they can't pay you. And they say if you stay, they're going to give you all the gear you want, which is a ski industry trick that no one should fall for. But was there even a thought of trying to make that work, or was it like, no, I got to get paid?
I had to get paid. And like, I had gotten some gear during the season. I remember I'd gotten like a helmet and goggle. I think it was a Smith helmet and goggle. I was able to demo skis from the demo shop. And then towards the end of the season, I got a pair of actually Blizzard Answers, if you remember that ski, with that kind of like binding track system on it, which was pretty crazy. But no, like at the end of it, they were basically like, yeah, we're kind of done. You know, at the time, like Solitude didn't really have summer operations. They definitely didn't have mountain biking. They might have had disc golf or something, but who really cares? So it was a pretty easy decision. And I kind of like tucked tail, and the girl I was dating at the time and I drove back to Spokane.
It's time for my first sponsor break, and Peter Glenn Ski and Sports has been supporting the show for years. And they're your one-stop shop for all of your summer needs. Think inline skates, wakeboards, water skis, bathing suits, footwear, travel wear. Yes, and even though it's summer, Peter Glenn always has the best prices on ski and snowboard gear. And not only do they have all the brands, Peter Glenn has been getting people out there for over 70 years, and their knowledgeable staff will have you dialed with the right gear in-store. And online, they offer a 5-star shopping experience, complete with free shipping over $50, a no-hassle return policy, and they will price match reputable dealers. So make sure you check out Peter Glenn before buying from anywhere else. And if anywhere else has a price that looks a little low, we'll price match it over at Peter Glenn so you can come support the show. To check out all the deals, head on over to peterglenn.com. Next up is Rollerblade, the brand that invented the sport of inline skating. And no one comes close to the fit, comfort, and performance of a Rollerblade branded inline skate. Whether you're looking for an ultra-supportive hard boot or a soft boot that features support where you need it, Rollerblade has the skate for you. And that's not all they have. For skiers out there, Rollerblade has created an award-winning skate-to-ski app designed to get your legs in shape for ski season or just to keep your ski legs in shape all year round. The app makes staying in shape fun, it's free, and it's available wherever you get your apps. And really, I can't say this enough about the sport of inline skating. Save your knees from running, save your bank account from biking, and pick up a pair of Rollerblade branded inline skates. Find all about all the skates, pads, and everything else over at rollerblade.com. Whether you're skiing, skating, biking, hiking, running at the skate park, doing yard work, or whatever, my next sponsor is the best way to celebrate a great workout or a great time without slowing you down. I'm talking about the best tasting non-alcoholic beer on the market, Best Day Brewing. 2023 is the year of the non-alcoholic drink. And for doers like you and me, midday beers don't cut it anymore. We've got to go out and pick up the kids, run errands, and go out and have more fun. And the safe and responsible way to do this is by not drinking alcohol. And you know what? Another thing I found myself doing with Best Day is that when I am drinking alcoholic beverages, I'll mix in a couple Best Days so I don't get too drunk and I can have fun all night. It's like I still feel like I'm partying because I am, but I'm only drinking like 60 calories instead of 300. It's amazing. Next time you're at the store, do what I've been doing and pick up a 6-pack of Best Day. My favorite flavor is the full-bodied hazy IPA, and I'd be curious to see what you like best. So when you pick up a 6-pack, drink it, and then shoot me an email at mike@thepowellmovement.com to let me know what you think about your new beer. To find out more about all things Best Day, head on over to bestdaybrewing.com. Those are my sponsors this break. Now it's time to jump back into the podcast. So you go to her place in Spokane, and there you get pretty much headhunted, or you get a call from a PR person. They're like, there's an open spot at the canyons. You need to apply for it. It is perfect for you. And is that pretty much what happens? You get a call, you end up calling the canyons, and they offer you a job, and you just pack up the car again, and you're like, I'll go right back to Utah?
Yeah, I mean, I got to Spokane, and in all truthfulness, not everybody knows this, but I was so broke at that time that I didn't have enough money to put gas in my car to get from Spokane to Tonasket, Washington, where my parents were, which is about 5 hours. And so I was staying at my girlfriend at the time's house, and obviously I was on my computer sending out job applications, whatever. And then through networking that I did during the season, Libby Dowd, who was the head of PR at the time at Canyons, sent me a note, told me I should apply, applied, and got the job offer. And I actually had to ask him for moving expenses because I didn't have enough money to get back down to Utah. But they were generous enough to offer me some moving expenses to cover my gas and get me down to Utah. And yeah, that was how I made it back down and kept myself in the ski industry.
And I'm guessing a big part of your focus at Canyons is social media. And is that part of the reason that you get the gig? Pretty much they see the growth that you're able to do with Solitude, and they're like, hey, we want this for us?
Yeah, I think, again, social media was still taking off. Resorts were starting to adapt it. Brands were starting to adapt it more and more. And to be clear, this was Canyons before Vail. So at the time, they were owned by Talisker, which I'm not sure how many people know that much about Talisker, but there was a lot of money flowing into Canyons at the time. And we got the opportunity to do some pretty crazy stuff. We built out a blog. We were running social media accounts. We got to run this contest, which is probably one of the first contests of its kind in the ski industry, called the Ultimate Mountain Gig. It was a good run there.
So the Ultimate Mountain Gig, this is a marketing program that was way ahead of its time. Can you describe that one?
Yeah, the Ultimate Mountain Gig was definitely ahead of its time. This was before influencers were a thing. This was kind of before any big social campaign programs from resorts were even a thing, honestly. And so we had this idea to give away the ultimate mountain job. And the program evolved, honestly. Like when we first hatched the idea, we wanted to work with somebody who had media experience, media background. So maybe a freelance journalist, somebody who could come in and write stories about Canyons, about their experience there, somebody who had experience with the camera, whatever. But then it quickly evolved into something much larger and much bigger. And we ended up working with two different people. Andy, who was ex-military from the UK. He was a sit skier. He had been paralyzed from the waist down. And then Kaylin Richardson, who was a two-time Olympian. And the gig was phenomenal. I mean, they got to live at the Waldorf Astoria. Kaylin was at the Waldorf. Andy was at the Grand Summit. They got passes. They got computers, cameras, ski gear, the whole kit and caboodle. And it was such a cool program. But their whole job was to create content. So, they would be out shooting. They would write blog posts. They would post on social media. They would actually ski around with VIPs that we had at the resort. So their role continued to evolve over the years, but it was a super cool program to bring a lot of exposure to kind of the evolution that Canyons was going through at that time with the Talisker ownership.
And it was a great time to be there as a marketer, not just because of the money influx, but Canyons was doing a rebrand, tearing the branding down to the studs and then building it back up. Are you able to be involved in all of the rebranding of the resort?
I was definitely involved in it. And like I said, Talisker had this vision of where they wanted to take Canyons. And it was a cool experience to be a part of because there was this balancing act and kind of discussion and push and pull between Talisker as this luxury real estate development company and then the people who were in place, even some of them back to the ASC days, trying to make sure that the culture and the community of Canyons and Park City stays intact. So yeah, I was involved quite a bit. I was definitely still a low-level marketing employee, but from the branding and promotion and kind of social media side of things was definitely involved.
Okay. And so with your life, you've taken a bunch of risks in leaving jobs and everything's kind of fallen into place for you. And then you're at your new gig and one weekend you're out climbing and you have arguably the most life-changing accident of your life. While you probably don't remember exactly what happened, I'm sure you've tried to piece it all together. Can you take us through what happened with your fall?
Yeah, I was rock climbing in Big Cottonwood Canyon and took a 30-foot fall to flat. And for anybody that rock climbs, that's not ideal, obviously. Right. But as you said, it was definitely the biggest accident of my life. And to this day, I think it has shaped kind of how I approach life and how I approach relationships and my job and work-life balance, whatever. But it was kind of really close to the entrance to BCC. But the 30-foot fall to flat The partner that I was with was able to get out to a place where he could make a call. I had to get life flighted from Big Cottonwood down to the Intermountain Medical Center in Sandy. And I had essentially 2 emergency surgeries. I had an open fracture in my arm, and I essentially landed on my side, if you think about it. And like my right arm kind of saved my head, if you will.
Okay.
I wasn't wearing a helmet at the time. And so my right arm, my right elbow was shattered. And they fixed that with 3 screws and a wire, which are still in there. And then essentially like the whole right side of my face was kind of messed up as well, pretty broken. And so after the first surgery on the elbow, because that was an open fracture, I went in for the second surgery on my face, and they had to do what's called a facial peel. That's exactly what it sounds like. If you've seen Face Off with John Travolta, it's eerily similar. But they cut me from ear to ear, basically through the first layer of skin, flesh, whatever. And then they pull it down to your nose. And that's how they put in 10 plates, titanium plates in my face, and then just roll it back up and staple it shut. So yeah, it was quite the life-changing event.
Yeah, so I have a bunch of different questions of it. Some of them will sound insensitive, and I don't mean them to be, but I have a friend who had one of those surgeries as well. He has got 11 plates in his face. And whenever we would go to the trade show in Vegas, when it was in Vegas, he would go play the slot machines. And I shit you not, he won every single time we were in Vegas. And he always credited his face and the plates in his face. And he thought they messed with the machines. Do you ever have lucky face plates like that when you go gamble?
No, man. And honestly, I am the world's worst gambler. I try to stay away from gambling. I'm really bad at it, and I haven't lost a lot of money, but the times I have gambled, I've always lost. But I do think it's interesting that like they're titanium and they don't make the metal detectors go off in airports. I thought that was the most interesting thing.
Huh. Does it bother you in different temperatures when it gets really cold out? Do you feel the plates in your face?
Yeah, for sure. Like from talking with the doctors, they tried to explain like what I would be feeling and stuff as I healed up. And, there's not a lot of insulation, I guess, on your face. And so, I can feel there's one plate specifically that's kind of close to the jawbone, right on the cheek. And you can definitely feel the temperature when it gets super cold.
And then how about head injuries with that? Do you have a TBI from this fall, or is it just your face that takes the impact?
Honestly, I'm probably, and this comes directly from the doctor, I'm probably the luckiest son of a bitch out there. I fell 30 feet. The Intermountain in Sandy is the hospital that gets the majority of climbing accidents from Little and Big Cottonwood Canyon. Pretty much anything over 15 feet results in something significant. And the doctor was like, you fell 30 feet, you fell twice as high. He's like, I never see anybody come away from something like that without like a broken leg, 2 broken legs, broken back, broken neck, whatever. And I was able to get away with none of that. And I didn't have a TBI. I was concussed for sure, but I guess it was my arm that kind of saved me from a TBI.
Wow. So you're really, really lucky. And I'm sure you wake up from all these surgeries and you're really, really foggy. How long until you understand what's going on, and when do you start worrying about the reality of your situation in life? Because while I think you have health insurance at this point, you've got to be wondering if you're going to keep your job. You've got to be wondering if you're going to be able to ski again. There's probably a bunch of questions in your head. And are you freaking out?
Definitely freaking out. I was making more money, but I wasn't making good money. And I think I had just gotten past that probationary period with Canyons where I got health insurance. And so it would have been super easy for them as a company to just be like, screw this. We are not going to take care of this guy. We're just going to cut him loose and like let him fend for himself. And so all these thoughts were definitely going through my head. And it was definitely a stressful time in my life. Like I couldn't see. My head was all wrapped with gauze and ace bandages and like couldn't see crap, couldn't really walk. Like the whole right side of my body, as you can imagine, was pretty jacked up. I would say one person that I have a ton of appreciation for to this day was my boss at the time, Jim Powell, who was the director of marketing at Canyons. He came to the hospital, talked to my mom, talked with me, and like just assured us that everything was going to be fine. They were going to take care of me. And he actually, him/Canyons paid to put me up at the Silverado Lodge at Canyons for almost 2 weeks because the little shitty apartment, little basement apartment that I was living at the time had stairs that went down to it and I couldn't really walk down the stairs. So They put me up. I was able to heal. My mom was able to stay there and help out. Yeah, I got lucky. A lot of different areas of luck that went into this whole situation.
That whole thing works itself out. After maybe 10 hours a week for 6 months, you get yourself back and everything's ready to go. And I would think, since Canyons was so good to you during your injury, that you'd want to stay there for a little while as a tip of the cap to how they treated you. But then I look at your LinkedIn and that's not the case. Were you actively seeking another gig once you got yourself healthy? Or were you cherry-picked? How did you end up leaving Canyons?
I guess after the accident, I worked for a little bit longer, and there was a lot of stuff going on at Canyons. As anybody who follows the history of Talisker Vale, that whole situation, it was pretty volatile at the time of how it was going to all work out, who was going to stay, who was going to go. And so I had started to put some feelers out. I had applied for a job at Target, which I was offered, and then the job disappeared, which was kind of a weird situation. But then I got a Twitter DM actually from Hillary Hutchison, who was the founder and owner of Outside Media at the time. And that was kind of the next step in my professional career.
When Outside Media comes and almost headhunts you, do they pitch the brands that you're going to work with? Like, hey, we've got Salomon, Atomic, and Alta, and they let you know that half the year the job's in Utah, half the year the job's in Montana, and it's one of those things that's a no-brainer, like you have to take that job?
Yeah, I mean, it was a pretty quick conversation. I remember they were in Utah. I don't know for what. They might have been there for outdoor retailer, summer outdoor retailer. And they met me at a coffee shop in Park City. We were sitting outside, and I had my sunglasses on, luckily, because she's like, oh, yeah, well, we just signed Alta, and we have Solomon, and we work with Tordrillo Mountain Lodge. And she's like, we want you to come and run the Alta account, and you'll get an office there during the winter, and then you'll be in Montana for the summer. I just remember my eyes were getting big, and I was like, holy shit, I've made it. I've made it. And so I think I went back that day and put in my 2 weeks, or maybe I waited a couple of days, but I was ready to roll, and it was exciting for sure.
So with this office that you have, does it become a second home? How often are you sleeping there?
Yeah, the office was like a second home, and the office is, I'm doing air quotes right now because it's hard to really describe it as an office when it was actually a refurbished coffee room and or washroom. It didn't have a toilet, but it had a sink, and it had cupboards, and then it had a baseboard heater, and then they had put a desk in there at the same time. So I could be sitting at my desk, I could touch the window and look out the window at the bottom of Colin's chair, but then behind me was a sink, and I couldn't really back up my chair that far. But the beauty of it is that it had enough space to throw down a sleeping pad and a sleeping bag. And obviously the baseboard heater was there, so I was warm enough to sleep. I'd say on average, I was spending, 15 to 20 nights up there a year sometimes.
It's time for my final sponsor break, and I'm going to start with the award-winning Elan ski brand. I've been telling you about how amazing my ripsticks are, and how the whole Elan collection will make you a better skier, and how they won more awards than almost any ski brand out last year. Elan truly makes a better ski, and their new Playmaker series are worth looking into, especially if you've been waiting for a twin tip from Elan. It's here, and trust me, it's just as fun as my ripstick. And to tell you the truth, I'm lucky to have Elan supporting the podcast this summer. Elan doesn't need to support snowboard or summer episodes, but they support this show because they believe you need to hear the best content in snow, and they want to support me. So I'm asking you, when you're looking for skis next year, give Elan a try, and I guarantee you're going to become a believer. There's a reason why Elan's building a cult following in the States, and once you get on a pair of their skis, you'll realize why. They'll make you a better skier. To find out more about all things Elan, head on over to elanskis.com. Next up, it's Stanley. And summer's finally here, and if you're like me, you like to get outside and go camping, paddleboarding, head to the beach, go adventuring. And to do all of that like a pro, I highly recommend heading over to Stanley1913.com. There, you're going to find all of your camping and adventure needs, along with that iconic water bottle that keeps your water ice cold and your coffee piping hot for hours longer than the competition. Stanley invented the category of keeping things hot and cold over 100 years ago, and they continue to innovate. And since I want you to have the best, I'm going to save you 30% on all Stanley products. All you need to do is head on over to Stanley1913.com, go shopping, and when you check out, use the code pmovement. That's all one word, all lowercase, and you'll get the best deal you find for Stanley on the internet. Those are my sponsors. Now let's jump back into the podcast. And when I think of Alta, it's arguably the best skiing in the country, but it's also one of the few places that doesn't allow snowboarders. How did you deal with the snowboarder complaints, being that marketing guy that probably has to hear a lot of them?
Yeah, there's a lot of them. And I remember like there was always people that would show up and try to get on the lift. And, you know, there's always these situations, but the communication around it is pretty simple. It's Alta Lift Company. That's who runs the resort, and the lifts are private, and they've made the decision to keep it that way. And, you know, I want to say it's kind of like an over exaggerated controversy, but I will say that the vast majority of Alta employees could care less whether they're snowboarding at Alta or not. I think it's safe to say that, you know, like it's a decision that's been made by the families that own Alta, and that's the way it is. So I think there's respect both ways.
So it's kind of like the same thing with everything else in the whole world is old white men making the rules and discriminating against people that are different than them. And there's like, hey, fuck it, we'll make the rules for our area, go snowboard somewhere else. I mean, it's open discrimination against somebody that does something different, but it's okay because it's private old white men who own it. You don't run anything here, but I'm just kind of saying it how it is, I feel like.
Yeah, I mean, I guess from, you know, outside people looking in, like that's a fair way to describe it. But you have to keep in mind that we live in a country where people who own something have the ability to run it the way that they want to run it. And so that's the way it is. It's not the only one that's like that. And I'm sure somebody who wanted to open a snowboarding only mountain could do that. And I bet it would be a pretty freaking cool experience.
Yeah, it just seems to me, you being the guy that I would say is one of the champions for inclusivity at Salomon, who's making sure that equality is something that the brand is striving to achieve. And it's funny that you worked with someone else who had a different belief in their company and just had to engage in that behavior, I guess. But it must have just been frustrating for you to have to be the snowboard police at Alta.
I wouldn't say I was ever the snowboard police. If I was considered the police, it was digital policing, right? Like I had to deal with the comments and like respond. And, you know, I had some pretty good canned responses. And it did come down to a personal level. The girl I was dating at the time was a snowboarder. And so like we obviously didn't get to ski that much together. And maybe that's part of the reason why we ended up breaking up. But I think like, yeah, it's an interesting situation. The Alta topic will always be there. It'll give everybody something to talk about on podcasts for, you know, the next 75 years.
Yeah, no, it's a great little conversation right there. And I like that part. But you aren't just working with Alta. You have Atomic and Salomon as clients as well. And they are two brands owned by Amber Sports. And I think they're in the same building, but they have totally different DNA. Why hire the same PR firm to represent both brands?
Yeah, that's a great question, man. I'm still curious about that to this day. But to answer your first question, yes, I worked with a lot of different brands. Alta was, quote unquote, my main client, but I also worked with Salomon, also worked with Atomic, also worked with Tordorillo Mountain Lodge, worked with a company called Climate, worked with a company called LifeStraw. And these were like on and off over the course of the 4 years that I spent with outside media, depending on the season, depending on workload, etc. On the Salomon Atomic topic, when I started with outside media, I was just running North American PR for Alpine. And then I think a year in, I took on the management of Salomon Freeski social channels. And essentially like Salomon Freeski Instagram and Twitter and Facebook was a thing, but just like any other brands at that time, it wasn't really an effective tool. And that was kind of like my job. I was hired by Bruno Bertrand and Jesse Malman, who was a North American sports marketing contact at the time. And my job was to build those accounts into something awesome. And it was freaking sweet.
I would think that this is where you get tight with all the athletes, because whenever people come into town, they want to come and ski Alta, and they come to you not only for tickets, but to create Salomon content as well. Are you like the one-stop shop for the Salomon team? And is that how you build all those relationships early on?
Yeah, that was an interesting time because I did have the Alta connection. I was working with Alta and then also on the Salomon side of things. It was kind of like a one-stop shop. From the Alta side of things, I got to work with that athlete team and the content creation for the resort and doing a lot of cool projects there. And then whenever we had athletes in for the Salomon side of things, whether it's, you know, Cody or Chris Rubens, Kalen Thorian, whatever, like, yeah, they were hanging out at Alta. A lot of them ended up sleeping on the ground at my house for some reason. But yeah, it was a good time and really collaborative way to work between Alta and Salomon.
And how does Atomic fit into this mix?
The Atomic Salomon part is more of like an Amer Sports topic. Amer Sports was the company that owned Salomon and Atomic. And at that time, there was this move within the organization to combine roles. And so it wasn't just my role on the PR side of things with an external agency that got combined. I can't remember if you talked to Jenny Taylor about this, but at one time, Salomon worked with Atomic as well.
Yep.
And so it was an interesting time. On the PR side, it was like an impossible task. It's like, oh, here's the QST 118 from Salomon. And then, oh yeah, here's the Ben Shetler 120 from Atomic. And, like we're competing brands that just happen to be owned by the same company. It was really unique, but it was an awesome opportunity to connect with the Atomic brand. I got to help launch apparel back when they did apparel, which was super cool. I launched on the PR side the new Ben Shetler when they launched Horizon Tech. So I got to work with Chris and that whole team on that side of things. So there's some pretty cool stuff that happened because of that connection, but it lasted about a year before they split them again. And the duties with PR got split alongside of that.
So you have this absolute dream job for a skier. You're on snow daily at Alta. You're working with these incredible brands. And then when you have to go on trips, you're going to go see Overcast and go ski at Tordrilla Mountain Lodge, which is a dream in itself. I hope you got to make that trip. I never did, but the pictures from that place look absolutely incredible. But then you get cherry picked by a client. I don't know how the whole Salomon thing works, but when a client steals an employee from the agency, is there bad blood? Because I would think that your agency, Outside Media, loses a key player, and at the same time, they might lose some work as well because Salomon's taking you to do the work that you were doing at Outside Media. How does that whole thing work?
Yeah, first, to be clear, I never got to ski at Tordrilla Mountain Lodge. And to this day, I'm pretty bitter about it. Hillary Hutchison got to go ski up there, and she's fished up there.
Oh, the Kings and Corn trip?
Yeah, we'll talk about that at a later time. But on the Salomon side of things, the beauty and the beast of working for an agency is that it's great. You get to work with multiple accounts, but at the same time, you're not an employee of any one of those specific brands.
Sure.
And so if the agency is going through some internal issues, you don't really have a lifeline. And at the time, after about 4 years, Outside Media was going through some struggles. At the time, I was under the impression, because Connie Marshall was the head of marketing, legend.
Yep.
She was the head of marketing at Alta. She's who I worked with. Ano Waringa was the GM, and he's who I worked with super closely as well. And Connie, she had already said 2-3 years, I'm going to retire. And so in my mind, I was like, I'm going to ride this wave, and then I'm going to become the director of marketing at Alta, and I'm never going to leave.
Right.
And it seemed like a great plan at the time. And then there was issues with Outside Media internally. You can kind of connect the dots, like the organization doesn't actually exist anymore. When it got to the point where I had to leave, and that was a super hard time for me because I had the best clients in the world and I had a really good setup. Anybody who would have done it or looked at it even was like, dude, you're living the dream. So yeah, I ended up quitting Outside Media, and I didn't have a job at that point. I actually quit and I moved to Sun Valley at the end of the ski season because I didn't know anybody up there. I knew 3 people. I knew McKenna Peterson, Cassie Abel, and Ryan Waterfield, who was the editor at Big Life magazine at the time. And I was like, I need to get away from it. Life was super weird at that time, and Ketchum seemed like a great place to go.
Whoa, I had no idea that you quit that job. I thought you were cherry picked out of it just because it seemed like that would be the natural fit. So how does Salomon all come together for you?
So I stepped away, but at the same time, I was still kind of like on the side running the Salomon social media stuff. So I still had that connection to the global team, was still working with Bruno Bertrand and the athletes while I was there. And then I was doing freelance work. I was doing some writing for Big Life magazine. And I don't know if you know who Shotsky is, the company, but yeah. Scott's a good friend. And I was doing freelance work for Shotsky, which was pretty fantastic at the same time. But I had zero plans except to enjoy myself in Sun Valley. And then Jenny Taylor, and she called and was like, hey, I have an opening for this outdoor marketing manager role. And she's like, I want you to do it. And I was like, cool. I could use some money. Can I live in Sun Valley and do it? And she's like, don't push your luck. Get your ass back to Utah. Let's do this. And the rest is kind of history. That's how I ended up back with Salomon.
Okay. So you're with Salomon. You work at the subsidiary level where the head of the company is in France. And I would think that gets you to France a couple times a year. Do you get to make that trip?
Yeah. I mean, when I first started, my title was outdoor marketing manager. And that meant that I was running the marketing for the Alpine category, the outdoor footwear category, which I believe at the time were the two largest dollar value categories in the company in
Jeez.
North America. And then I was still doing global social media stuff. And for context, like that is now 3+ different roles.
Right.
And so when you work for just one category, like I do now on the Alpine and apparel side, like I take 2 to 3 trips to France a year. So at the time I was taking like 6 to 7 trips to France a year. And then that's not counting the amount of travel I was doing regionally or to Canada. Like I was never home, man. It was pretty wild.
And then when you're traveling all that time, all your emails are stacking up and it's like you come back and you have to dig out for 5 days and you can't get anything done. So you're constantly way too busy to be productive.
Yeah, I think it is an exercise in prioritization. And I think that was the beauty of having all those different roles and juggling the different categories, because you go from like, oh, we just finished selling for spring, summer 23 footwear. And oh shit, we got to like work on fall, winter 23 sell through for Alpine. And then you have to switch and you're doing like selling for fall, winter 24 footwear. And it really helped me be able to prioritize and focus and really recognize who needs to be replied to right away. How do you reply to those people? And to this day, I think it's probably what has allowed me to do my job as well as I do.
And then when you think about the marketing of the Salomon brand, every brand really creates a marketing toolbox that they get out to different markets and they distribute. And it's the way for the brand to be consistent in different markets. With you guys, does Salomon France create the toolbox and then send it to you? Or are you creating your own one for the US and then them approving it?
Yeah, so when I started, you kind of mentioned it, headquarters is in France. We're here as one of the subs. We're set up as a typical go-to-market organization where in a perfect world, that's how it works. It's toolbox handoff and we execute. But it doesn't work that well when the toolbox is being created in a different country and those countries and markets are so drastically different. Like the French market for ski is completely different on so many levels than a North American market.
Sure.
It goes from product to how consumers purchase stuff, how they expect to be communicated to, et cetera. Drastic difference. And so when I first started, we'd get this toolbox and I'd be like, none of this makes sense. Like this just doesn't work. So over the years, like the big push has been to integrate ourselves at a deeper level in the actual creation of that toolbox at the global level. And right now we're to the point where we just had meetings after our last sales meeting in November, and like they refer to us as the extension of the ADC here in North America. And like no other sub really gets that, but like essentially the idea is that for any of the products that make sense in the North American market, whether it's QST skis, shift bindings, stride bindings, whatever, we're working hand in hand with the global team to make sure that the end product or the end content or the end assets that are created and ready for the consumer are going to make sense here so that we're not doubling efforts.
So you have the strongest voice of any subsidiary in the countries that Salomon works with. And then you're also responsible for making sure things don't get lost in translation and everything works in the US?
Correct. Yeah, I think that's fair to say. I mean, the Alpine market in North America is one of the largest in the world. For any ski company, you know, North America is super important. So I think that's fair to say that like when you're talking about Salomon, like the focus is here for sure. And essentially like my job is to be that connection between the North American consumer and our global team via the channel of the voice of North America. Like I have to make sure that like the imagery makes sense. I have to make sure the words make sense. I have to make sure that the videos and content that we're producing will have the impact that we're trying to make them have. So yeah, it's a great spot to be in, honestly. And it makes me happy to know that like that's the job that I'm doing for a company like Salomon.
Some of the things you just brought up are a lot of the blocking and tackling and making sure that the messages are being communicated correctly. But when you think of some of the bigger picture projects that you get to work on outside of the day-to-day marketing stuff with Salomon, what are the things that you're really proud of? Like, what are the things that get you motivated to come to work every day?
You bring up a great point, like the blocking and tackling. And I think when people and consumers probably, they look at the ski industry and like, oh man, that job's sick. Like you just go out and ski every day. But it's just like any other job. There's the budgeting and all the line items and the invoicing and all the stuff that it does get you bogged down. But the stuff that continues to keep me coming back to this job, continues to keep me here in this role, is the opportunity to work with organizations and people. Like, I think people continuously is what sets Salomon apart. You know, you talk about our athletes. I think like one of the coolest projects that we've launched is the Junior Mountain Collective, creating like a group of, you know, essentially 16 to 20-year-olds that we're working with to develop the next generation of not only skiers for Salomon, but product that Salomon's going to be coming out with. Last year, we released the first film that was like fully shot, edited, produced, everything by kids under the age of 18.
Yeah, that was pretty cool.
And we're doing another one with them this year. That's pretty awesome. And then I think like product launches are fantastic. Product is the lifeblood of a company like Salomon. You know, it's continuing to innovate, whether it's ship binding, S-Lab MTN boots, QST skis with new technology, whatever it is. Being a part of that process and seeing the product, and then instantly your wheels start turning like, okay, how are we going to position this? How are we going to sell this? How are we going to promote this? That's pretty great. And then I think continuing to partner with organizations that make sense. You know, I was able to lead our partnership with POW, which is the first time in Salomon's 75-year history that we've had a relationship with POW, and really excited about that, working with that team to continue to evolve how we communicate and how we work and how we throw our weight around as a brand in that space. And then I think the film tour, you know, honestly, the Quality Ski Time film tour is a freaking blast. And working with Drew Peterson and Dakota Wright on that, and giving consumers the opportunity to have a unique experience with the Salomon brand, where you don't just get one movie, you get 5 movies, and you get 5 movies that are drastically different from each other. And I think like having that different experience has really set us apart from, you know, the TGRs, the MSPs of the world. And it is what is allowing us to continue to grow that tour year over year.
Oh man, that's pretty cool. And it sounds like you're working on some fun, big picture stuff. And you know me, one of the things I like to talk about a lot is money. And with the path that you've chosen, it's lifestyle over money. And while I'm not going to ask you about your numbers, because I think that's not fair when you're working with Salomon right now, I'm just going to assume, and I'll assume the range is going to be like 100 to 150K or somewhere around there. But really, my question around money is there more money in the brand marketing side of things, or do you do better at an agency?
I would say there's probably more money on the brand side of things, but I think, you know, it just depends on the level of your agency. Outside Media wasn't necessarily a big agency. I mean, at its height, there were 5 employees. I hope that kind of like puts it in perspective as far as how big that agency was. It was a small agency doing big work for big clients. It wasn't like working for a Wyden and Kennedy or something like that, who has like Nike contracts and big budgets. But I think I kind of mentioned it earlier, on the brand side, not only do you have potentially bigger budgets, but you have more security, if you will. Like, you're not going to get made or broken by a client dropping you. Whereas if a small agency gets dropped by one client, they're probably going to have to cut one employee.
Yep. And I would think too, on the agency side, you never really feel part of the brand because you're not really part of the brand. And even though you feel like you've got some of that brand's DNA in you and you can speak on behalf of the brand, it's never actually 100% right, I feel like. I mean, I've worked with a bunch of agencies. I know you have as well. And while even the best ones are so good at almost being what you want them to be, it's never 100% the brand voice. And that's not as good as having a good employee who can just speak the brand, I feel like.
100%. I totally agree with that. And that was honestly something I struggled with as an agency, you know, like there's not the credibility, especially when you're talking to like a Powder magazine or whatever. And I remember having conversations with Stifter or Davies or, you know, whoever was the editor at the time. And my job was to pitch them and like communicate with them and have those conversations. And in the end, like a lot of times they always just wanted to talk to somebody at the brand. Now I'm that guy. I guess I've kind of like shifted into the role that I always wanted to have.
So you did the agency, you did the brand, and you make more in the brand world. But really, with money in skiing, the industry makes money, a lot of it. Why are brands hiring on the promise of living the dream instead of paying a competitive wage?
That's a great question. I think it's historical, right? I mean, I think there's this story and this lifestyle that we've built around the sport of skiing, and people love to think of it like it used to be. Like you used to be able to be like a ski bum and live off of very little and do that. I think it's still possible, but it's not as realistic as it once was. And, you know, I think the brands are paying a living wage. And like, I think there's the opportunity to make money in the ski industry. But at the same time, I think when you look at maybe even the greater outdoor industry or outside of the outdoor industry, in similar roles and jobs, there's not the equality there when you compare it to the work that people are doing within the ski industry. And I think that that's something that as a whole, we need to look at. This isn't specific to Salomon. This is specific to the greater outdoor industry. I think that we need to be taking a hard look at what we're trying to do as an industry and who's going to help us get there, and making sure that we're taking care of people in the best way possible.
Yeah, I've always thought about it where if you work for a brand and you want to go on ski vacations, it's amazing. You get tons of trips and get to be able to do all you want. But if you get a job outside of the industry, you have no work to do and you can afford to go on all those trips. And it's amazing because you actually make the money that you're worth. In the industry, you don't make as much, but you do get to live that lifestyle, live the dream a little bit, depending on your position. You and I had those positions, or you have and I had those positions where you're traveling the world. Not everybody does. So that's an interesting thing. And I will say that's going to be the body of our podcast. And now I'm going to jump into what I like to call inappropriate questions, which you know about. And it's totally fitting that we're recording inappropriate questions during Pride Month, because the guy I have asking the inappropriate questions is celebrating the shit out of this month, as everyone should. I'm talking about former ski industry guy turned tech guy turned Salomon athlete influencer who isn't working right now. He's just crushing life, skiing more powder than anyone during the ski season, and he's partying more than anyone else during Pride Month. I'm talking about Digi Dave Amirault. And are you ready for question number 1 from Digi Dave?
Oh, yeah.
Joe, it's your favorite Salomon athlete, Digi Dave. Our friendship can be traced back to following each other on Twitter, but the first time we met in person was in Lake Tahoe. Who was the rapper that was at the conference that we first met? And also, what was the game we were all playing that involved Five Fingers and Jeremy Tanner's face?
Man, I love that Digi is asking these questions. My relationship with him goes back so far and through so many different areas of our world. But yeah, we were in Tahoe for what was called Snowshul at the time. And I don't know how many people remember that. It was like a snow sports industry social media conference that was run by Vail, like when they launched the Epic Mix or the Epic Pass or whatever it was. But it was just OG mix of freaking awesome people from not only the industry, but outside of the industry. I mean, we had people from freaking Twitter. We had people from MySpace. It was a great mix of people. Chris Rudolph, RIP.
Yeah.
That's where like our relationship started. It was so great. Anyways, the first time I met Digi was in the lobby of a South Lake Tahoe casino, and he actually iced me before I got to shake his hand.
Sounds like Dave.
So that's how we kicked that off. The rapper, shit, man, I don't remember.
Come on. You're country music guy. That's why. Playing country music on your college radio station.
I want to say it was probably something weird like Vanilla Ice or something like that.
Dude, if it was Vanilla Ice and you didn't remember it, I would be so disappointed.
Gosh, I'm blanking on that. But the game, we were like straight up slapping people in the face. And I have this photo on my phone of Jeremy Tanner getting straight up slapped, like full, like you can see the facial compression in it. I mean, we were just doing some idiotic things at that time in our lives, but it was also phenomenal. It also, to this day, that drive back from Tahoe with Joe Myers to Salt Lake City was probably the worst 8 hours of my life.
Just hungover, terrible drive?
Oh, well, you're hungover and then you're just driving straight for 8 hours. There's nothing worse than that. Like, you're just like trying to keep your eyes open. But to go back to his question, I mean, so many people got slapped in the face that night and so many weird things happened. And I wish I could remember that rapper, but I just can't off the top of my head.
All right, well, we'll give you a pass there because you're a country music guy from nowhere, Washington. But let's jump into question number 2.
Joe, you're engaged to an amazing woman and are on the path to marrying up. As an added bonus, you're about to be a dad to 3 amazing girls. And we see a lot of posts on Instagram about you being a wonderful girl dad. But my question is, what's it like to come home every day to a sea of estrogen and be wildly outnumbered by women?
Oh, man, nailed it. It's true. I am marrying up. I'm getting married on July 15th to Christy Muir. It's going to be awesome.
Congrats.
Getting married in Tahoe, actually. It's going to be pretty great. And to Digi's point, Christy does have 3 amazing daughters, Kenzie, Josie, Goldie, and Digi made probably the best term. He called me Diet Dad when we first started dating. But, you know, sometimes I joke with people that I led a pretty selfish life up until when Christy and I started dating. And it was intentional, right? Like I could do whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted. And I think not only am I marrying up and like I'm marrying an amazing woman, but like she's done a phenomenal job with her girls and getting the opportunity to work together with her on that and like try to be like the best influence in their life as possible, which has been pretty awesome. You know, like getting to ski with them, getting to play soccer, all that kind of stuff is pretty good. To his point about a house filled with estrogen, I mean, I can't disagree with that. Like there's so much feminine energy in that house. The vast majority of the time, you know, sometimes I just got to bug out and go ride my bike or something. But, you know, it's the beauty and the beast of being outnumbered 4-1.
Yeah, I would think it's like coming home and watching Frozen instead of the Bad News Bears or something like that.
Yeah, I have watched Frozen.
I mean, I have too. There's nothing wrong with watching Frozen. All right, we'll go with your final inappropriate question.
I assume Powell has already asked you about your accident, the plate in your face, and almost dying. So I'm going to take this one into the work realm. Joe, what is the worst way someone has ever asked to be sponsored by Salomon? And what is the correct way people should pursue sponsorships?
I would say, and these come from multiple different channels, honestly, like we get Instagram DMs, Twitter DMs, we get emails that come through like info@Salomon. I got a handwritten letter without a return address requesting sponsorship actually on Monday. I was blown away. The girl is a travel nurse and I have no idea why she decided to write a letter, but like, I'm intrigued. I just have no way to reply because there's no return address. But I would say on average, I'm probably getting like 50 to 75 a year. And that's just me. I would say Bruno Bertrand is getting the same amount. Probably the person running the social media accounts these days filters through quite a few as well. So the worst way to do it is to spell Solomon wrong. We're not like the king. I would say probably 35 to 40% of people spell Salomon wrong in their sponsor me emails, letters, DMs, whatever. And for me, that's like an automatic circular file. Like, do your homework, spell the damn name right. It's not that hard.
Right.
I think the best way to do it, and I talk to all of our athletes about this as well when we're talking about project pitches, you know, when they're talking about how to get money for film support, whatever. It's like be as professional as possible and think about like every possible question or need that I might have from the brand angle and answer that. Don't just write an email. Maybe include a link to your social profile. Maybe create a little edit so that I can actually see you skiing. Have really good grammar and like do it in a coherent fashion. Like those ones automatically make it to the top for me. And those are memorable. Those ones, I keep them in a file. The people who do a really good job of communicating why they're like a good option to be an athlete for Salomon.
So there you go. Make it easy for him to want to keep it in a file to show off to other people how it's done best. And everybody should know how to be able to showcase who they are best if they're going to try to apply for anything. So listen to Joe's words, do what he said there. That's Inappropriate Questions, and that's our podcast. And your story's interesting. Based on how it all started out, I would have expected you to try to go get an internship with the Sonics or anything basketball related, and then have a long career walking around arenas. But like every good story, there are some pivots, and college pointed you in a direction that took you to tourism, and there basketball weaved into that. But that's when you found your passion for skiing. And since then, outside of recovering from that terrible injury, your life's been all about being paid to chase snow. You truly are living the dream, and I thank you for your time, Joe.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it.
So that was Time with Joe Johnson, and I love rags to industry riches stories like Joe's. You know, small town kid who doesn't even have skiing on his radar, but when he gets bit by the bug after college, he's off to the races with a resume of the best jobs in snow. And while hard-headedness isn't usually a great quality to have, for Joe, it allowed him to survive that 30-foot to flat fall that sounded so crazy. I mean, really, Joe's just lucky to be alive. And nowadays, he lives and plays in the mountains with some of the best in the world. That's when he's not manning one of the most important desks in ski marketing. That's the show for this week. At this point, I want to wish Joe an amazing wedding that's coming up in the next couple days. I want to thank you for listening, and I want to ask everyone to support the best brands in snow, skate, and beyond. I'm talking about my sponsors, Stanley, Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, Elon Skis, Rollerblade, and Best Day Brewing. Have a great week, everyone.